I found out my husband had a whole other life from a wedding photo I wasn't even in. Frame 847, background left, out of focus, a woman I'd never seen holding his suit coat over her arm. That's not the part that ruined me. The part that ruined me came about 40 minutes later, in frame 1102, when I zoomed in on that woman's left hand and saw a ring I'd been told was sold in 2019. I'm 33. I teach middle school orchestra in Denver, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, going on 8 years, which means I spend my working life listening to 41 children play a Vivaldi arrangement slightly wrong and identifying exactly which one of them is flat. I want you to remember that about me. Noticing the one wrong thing in a field of noise is not a personality quirk for me. It's my actual job. My husband is Anders. He's 36. He's a regional operations manager for a medical courier company, which means he oversees a network of drivers who move lab samples and blood products between hospitals and labs across the Front Range. We got married in 2017. 8 years, and my best friend is Whitney. We met in the dorms at Colorado State in 2010, and we were 19 years into it when this happened. Maid of honor at my wedding. The person I called from the bathroom floor after my second miscarriage. That kind of friend. Whitney got married on the 20th of September to a guy named Perry at a venue in Morrison with a view of the foothills. I wasn't there. I had strep. Actual, cultured, diagnosed strep throat, 101.4 degrees, and I cried about it in an urgent care parking lot on the 18th because I had been planning to give a toast. Whitney was so sweet about it. She said, and I remember this word for word because I've turned it over about 4,000 times since, "Honey, do not you dare. Just send Anders, he can eat your dinner too." Just send Anders, so Anders went alone. He left at 3:30, he texted me a picture of the ceremony from the back row, and he was home a little after 10. He came in and sat on the end of our bed and complained about the DJ for 6 or 7 minutes, and then he brought me a ginger ale and put his hand on my forehead to check my temperature. I want to be very clear about something. He was a good husband, not a distracted one, not a cold one. He remembered my mother's birthday. He replaced my car's windshield wipers without being asked. He came to every single concert I conducted, sat in the 3rd row, and clapped for other people's children. That's what I can't get past, even now. It wasn't a marriage with a hole in it. It was a marriage that ran perfectly, and I have had to accept that a person can do all of that on purpose. Okay, the things I noticed and let go. There are 3, and every one of them comes back. The first was the ring. Anders's grandmother Ingrid died in the spring of 2019. She left him her engagement ring, which is an old European cut diamond, maybe a carat in a yellow gold setting with these tiny scrolls on the shoulders and a hairline scratch across the table of the stone that you can only see when the light hits it. I know that ring intimately because I wore it for 6 weeks. Anders had it appraised that May, $11,200, and in June of 2019 we were $9,000 short on the down payment for the house we're in now, a little brick ranch in Athmar Park, with a bad kitchen and a great yard, and we sat at the kitchen table and had one of those grim adult conversations, and Anders said he'd sell the ring. I said, absolutely not. I said, it's your grandmother's. I said I'd rather rent for another 2 years. And he said, and this is the part I would like to burn out of my head, he said, Ingrid would rather her grandson had a house than a rock in a drawer. He came home 9 days later and told me he'd gotten $9,200 for it at an estate buyer in Cherry Creek. He was quiet that whole weekend. I made him lasagna. I told him I was proud of him. I actually said I was proud of him. The second thing was the phone. Not in a dramatic way. He's had a work phone since 2021, a company Android, because the courier network runs 24 hours and he's on an escalation rotation. That phone was never a secret. It sat on the counter charging most nights. What I noticed, in a low-grade way, is that he never used it in front of me. Personal phone, sure, all the time, on the couch, in bed. But the work phone he'd take out to the garage or the back step, and when I said something about it once, in 2023, he said, "It's HIPAA stuff, I'm not supposed to have patient identifiers where anybody can see them." Which is a genuinely correct thing about his industry, and which shut me up completely for 2 years. The third thing was the Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Starting in 2022, he had 2 overnights a week, sometimes 3. The company had expanded into a hub in the Springs, 40 minutes south, and he was down there overseeing a new dispatch operation, and it was easier to stay than drive back at 11 at night and turn around at 5. He kept a room at an extended stay place. I was fine with it. Genuinely. I have a job where I sometimes get home at 9:30 from a district festival, and there's a version of marriage where two people have their own weeks and it works, and I thought that's what we had. I met his boss at a Christmas party in 2022. I met two of his drivers. His was legible to me from the outside, which is why it never once occurred to me to check anything. Now the wedding gallery, Whitney got married in September. The professional photos came out in January, because that's how long good photographers take. On a Tuesday night, the 14th of January, she dropped the link into a group chat with 6 of us from college, the one that's mostly memes and one person's dog, and she wrote, "Finally, all 1100, go find yourselves." I was in bed at 9:40 with my laptop, half watching something, and I started scrolling. Here's what I want people to understand about this discovery, because everybody assumes I was suspicious. I was not. I was scrolling a wedding gallery looking for pictures of my friend in her dress. I had 0 thoughts in my head. It's the most ordinary way in the world to have your life end. 8:47. A wide shot of the cocktail hour, shot from the doorway, in focus on a group of Whitney's cousins near the front. Background left, well behind them, slightly soft, my husband standing at the bar. And next to him, closer than a stranger stands, a woman in a green dress with dark hair in a low bun. She's laughing at something. She has his suit coat folded over her left forearm. I want to explain why that stopped me, because when I told my sister about it, she didn't get it at first. Nobody holds a man's coat like that. Not a coworker, not a wedding guest, not a woman you just met at a bar. When a man hands you his coat and you fold it over your arm without looking at it, without adjusting it, while you keep talking to someone else, that is a woman who has been handed that coat 100 times. That is a wife's arm. I sat up. I did not wake him. He was asleep next to me. I want that detail in there because I still think about it. I made a decision, in about 4 seconds, not to wake up my husband. Instead, I got out of bed, took the laptop to the kitchen table, made tea I didn't drink, and I went back to frame 1, and I looked at all 1100 photos. It took me 2 hours and 40 minutes. They're in 10 shots, 10 out of 1100, all of them incidental, all of them in the background, because the photographer was doing her job, and her job was Whitney, Fort 212. They're walking in together from the parking area. Not near each other together, his hand is on her lower back at the door, 390, seated at the same table. I could see a table number card, table 6, Fort 504. She's laughing and he's got his head down doing that thing he does where he laughs at his own joke before the punchline. Form 661. He's crouched down fixing the strap on her shoe and on, and I sat there getting colder and colder, and honestly, by frame 800 I had already accepted it. Affair. My husband is having an affair, and he brought her to my best friend's wedding while I was home with a fever. That's what I thought I was dealing with. Then I got to the sparkler exit, frame 1102. Everyone's lined up with sparklers, arms up, and Whitney and Perry are running through. And in the crowd on the right, the woman in green has both arms raised holding a sparkler, and there's a ring on her left hand. I zoomed in. The photo's a professional file, so it holds up. I zoomed in until it pixelated, and then I backed off and I looked at it for probably a full minute. Old European cut. Yellow gold. Little scrolls on the shoulders. I have a photograph of my own hand from 2017, from the weekend we got engaged, before we sized it down and before Anders replaced it with the one I actually wear. I keep it in a folder on my phone. I pulled it up and I put the 2 images side by side on that kitchen table at 12:40 in the morning, same ring, same setting, same everything, and I understood, in a way that arrived all at once, that this was not an affair. Men having affairs do not put their dead grandmother's ring on a woman's hand. That's when I stopped crying, and I hadn't even noticed I'd started. A lot of people would have gone upstairs and woken him up. I want to explain why I didn't, and it isn't strength. It's that I am, at bottom, a person who wants the full score before she raises the baton. I made a decision at that kitchen table that I would not say one word until I knew the whole shape of it. And I gave myself a deadline, because otherwise I'd never do it. 5 days. Day 1 was Wednesday. I taught 7 classes. I have no memory of any of them. Wednesday night I did the easy searching. There is not much you can do with a photograph of a woman's face and no name. I tried reverse image search, which gave me nothing. I looked through Whitney's tagged photos on social media, and the woman in green isn't tagged in any of them because she doesn't have public accounts I could find. But Whitney had posted a story on her wedding weekend, a repost of somebody else's, a boomerang from the dance floor, and in the corner of it, for about a second, that green dress. And the account she'd reposted from was a woman named Kelsey Brandt. Kelsey Brandt's profile was private, but her profile picture was her and another woman on a hike, and her bio said she was a labor and delivery nurse, so I had a first name to test. Thursday, day 2, I did the thing that actually cracked it open, and it cost nothing. I opened our shared cell phone bill. We're on a family plan, 4 lines, 2 of which are our parents. I have never once looked at the call detail, not in 8 years. It's just a bill I pay. His personal line was clean. Completely, boringly clean. But there's a 4th line on that plan that I had always assumed was his work phone, and I had never questioned because the company reimburses us for it. It shows up as a line item in our budget spreadsheet, $95 a month, a B work phone re-in. That line had 1 number on it. Constantly, 14, 15 calls a day, some of them 40 minutes long, at 10 at night, at 6:15 in the morning, on Christmas afternoon while he was in the shower, not a dispatch center. 1 number with a 719 area code, which is Colorado Springs. Friday, day 3. I called that number from the school's front office phone during my planning period, and I want to say for the record that my hands were completely steady and that I felt like I was watching myself from the ceiling. A woman answered. Young sounding, cheerful. She said, "Hey, this is Kelsey." I said I was sorry, wrong number. And I hung up, and then I went into the instrument storage closet and sat on a cello case for 11 minutes. Saturday, day 4, was the worst one because I had to be in the house with him. He made pancakes. He asked if I wanted to go look at flooring for the kitchen. And I said sure, and we drove to a flooring place on Broadway and looked at engineered oak for an hour. And he talked about how we could do it over spring break, and I stood in a showroom next to my husband and thought about a woman named Kelsey answering a phone. That afternoon, while he went to the store, I did the last piece. I looked up Colorado Springs property records. County assessor sites are public and free and take about 4 minutes to figure out. I searched Brandt, and there it is. A townhouse on the north end of the Springs, purchased in June of 2023 for $411,000. Owners: Kelsey R. Brandt and Anders M. Halverson, both names on the deed. My husband's full legal name on a property I have never heard of, purchased with a down payment I cannot account for, 20 months ago. I printed it at the library on Sunday for 40 cents. Sunday night, day 5, I did it. He was on the couch watching a game. I brought the laptop to the kitchen table and I said, "Anders, come here for a second." He came in with his beer. I had frame 1102 up, zoomed all the way in on her hand, and I said, "Whose hand is that, and why is your grandmother's ring on it?" I have never seen a human being's face do what his did. It wasn't guilt. It was closer to what you'd look like if a doctor said a word you'd been dreading for years. Almost relief, honestly, mixed into it, which made me want to throw the laptop at him. He set the beer down and he said, "Danica." I said, "Her name is Kelsey Brandt. You bought a townhouse together in June of 2023. Say something true." And he sat down across from me and he said, and this is verbatim, "I was going to tell you. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for 2 years. 2 years, I said. Is she your girlfriend? And Anders said, she's my fiancé. Fiancé. To a married man. And I laughed, one of those horrible barking laughs, and I said, "Does she know about me?" And my husband looked at the table and said, "She thinks we've been divorced since 2022. Here's what came out over the next 4 hours, and I'm going to lay it out flat because I can't make it any softer. He met Kelsey in September of 2021 at a hospital in the Springs. He proposed in December of 2022 with Ingrid's ring, which he never sold, which had been in a safe deposit box he opened in June of 2019 at a bank in Lakewood, which I found the statements for on Monday morning in a folder in the garage labeled truck maintenance. He told her he was divorced, told her his ex-wife lived in Denver, and that it had been amicable, and that there'd been fertility problems, which is the detail I choke on, because he took my 2 miscarriages and used them as set dressing for a fly, financially. The townhouse down payment was $41,000 out of a joint savings account, taken in chunks over 18 months and described to me as a home equity thing for our roof and our furnace. The $9,200 he supposedly got for the ring came from a loan against his 401k, and the work phone reimbursement of $95 a month that we had been paying for 4 years was a line I was funding so he could talk to her. He said the sentence at about 2 in the morning that I will hear until I die. He said, "I know how this sounds, but I never wanted to lose either one of you." And that's when I finally raised my voice for the first and only time in this entire story. I said, "You didn't have 2 lives, Anders. You had 1 life and 1 hostage, and I was the one paying the phone bill." He slept in the basement. I did not sleep at all. And around 6 in the morning, sitting in that kitchen with the sun coming up, I thought about frame 390, table 6, somebody put her at table 6. Somebody made a seating chart. I want to talk about the 11 days after that, because I think that stretch is more interesting than the confession, and it's when I stopped being a woman having a breakdown and started being a woman with a binder. Monday I called in sick, which I have done 4 times in 8 years. I found the safe deposit box statements in the garage. I photographed everything in the house. Bank statements, the 401k loan paperwork, the deed printout, the phone bill call detail. I made 3 copies and gave one to my sister Merritt. Tuesday I called a divorce attorney in Denver named Rosalind Oyelerin. $400 for the consultation. She told me 3 things. First, Colorado is a no-fault state, so him having a fiancé does not by itself change the division of anything. I said okay. Second, marital funds spent outside the marriage are a real claim. $41,000 of joint savings into a house he owns with another woman, plus the 401k loan, plus 4 years of a phone line, is dissipation of marital assets, and it goes into the calculation. Third, and this is the one that changed the whole game, because we are legally married, and because he purchased that townhouse during the marriage using marital funds, his 50% interest in a $411,000 property is a marital asset. Kelsey's 50% is hers. His 50% is ours. Rosalind said, "He built her house with your money, and now he owns half of it, and half of his half is yours." I said, "Does she know that?" And Rosalind said, "I would assume she doesn't know any of it." Wednesday I told Anders I'd filed. He begged. "That's the part nobody prepares you for." I expected coldness, and instead I got a 36-year-old man sitting on our bathroom floor at 11 at night saying he'd end it with her that week, that it had gotten away from him, that he'd never meant it to go past 2022. And I want to be honest. For about 90 seconds on Wednesday night I felt sorry for him, then Thursday happened, and the sorry went away permanently. Thursday morning I got a text from Whitney. "Hey." Anders called Perry last night. He sounded rough. "Is everything okay? Call me." I called her, and I told her. Everything. The gallery, the ring, the townhouse, all of it, and I was crying, and she was making all the right noises, and then I said the thing I'd been thinking since 6 in the morning on Monday. I said, "Whit, she was at your wedding. She was at slop 6. And Whitney did not say what a person says. She did not say who, or what are you talking about, or oh my God, are you serious? There was a pause of about 2 seconds, and then my best friend of 19 years said, "Danica. That's not, I had 200 people there. 200 people there. Not who is she? Not there's no way." I said, "I didn't tell you her name." Silence, and then Whitney said, "I'm going to come over." I said, "No." I said, "I have a question and I want you to answer it right now. Did you know?" And Whitney said, "It's more complicated than that." I hung up on her, and then I did something I'm not sure I would advise anybody to do, but which I'd do again. I emailed her photographer. Her name is Marguerite. She's a wedding photographer in Golden, and she was lovely at my own wedding. She's the one who shot mine in 2017, which is how Whitney found her. I wrote her an email that said, essentially, "I'm in the middle of something awful. My husband appears in your gallery with a woman I didn't know existed, and I am trying to establish whether she was an invited guest. Do you retain your shot lists and timeline documents from September?" Photographers do. They keep the whole production file, the timeline, the family shot list, the venue notes, the seating chart the coordinator gives them so they can find people. It's how they know where Aunt So-and-so is sitting for the toast. Marguerite wrote back in 4 hours. She said she'd thought about that gallery when she heard we'd separated. She sent me the wedding day timeline document and the seating chart, and she said, "I hope this is the right thing to do." The seating chart is a spreadsheet, table 6. 8 names: Kelsey Brandt, Anger Halvorsen, not Anders Halvorsen, and guest. 2 separate line items, 2 separate names entered by the bride, and down at the bottom of the timeline document, in the notes column, in a section for the coordinator, there is a comment from the bride dated the 11th of August, 6 weeks before the wedding. It says, "Do not seat table 6 near head table. Ask A about guest situation. Ask A about guest situation." She knew. She didn't just find out at the reception and freeze. She was managing it in August. She built a seating chart around it. She moved a table so my husband and his fiancée would be far enough from the head table that nobody would ask. And then, in January, she dropped the gallery link into a group chat that had me in it. Because she had forgotten what was in her own photographs, Whitney came to my house on Friday anyway. She stood on my porch, and she cried, and she told me the whole thing. She'd found out in July, 6 weeks before the wedding. She and Perry ran into Anders at a brewery in the Springs after a hike. He was with Kelsey. Kelsey introduced herself as his fiancée. Whitney said the world tilted and she made an excuse and got in the car. And she said Anders called her that night. My husband called my best friend that night and told her a version, that we'd been separated for a year, that we were keeping it private because I was ashamed, that I'd asked him not to tell anybody, and that he'd appreciate her giving me space to tell people myself. And Whitney believed it. For about a week, then, she says, she noticed things didn't add up. I posted a photo of us at a Rockies game in July. I mentioned a trip we were planning, and she called Anders again and pushed, and he admitted it wasn't a separation, and he asked her not to say anything. And he said he was going to tell me after her wedding because he didn't want to blow up her weekend. And then she said the sentence, standing on my porch. She said, "Danica, I had one wedding. I'd waited 33 years. I couldn't be the person who detonated your marriage 6 weeks before it," I said. "So you invited her," and Whitney said she was already on the list. I'd met her in July and given her my number before I knew. Taking her off would have meant a whole conversation, and I put them at 6. I said, "You had 2 months. You had my number. You could have called me from your car in that brewery parking lot." And she said, "I know." Then she said, "I was going to tell you in October." And then October came and you were so happy about the kitchen, and I thought, 1 more month. 19 years, I told her to get off my porch. She sent a 4-page letter in February that I read once. "We are done, and I want to be honest that losing her hurt worse than losing him for about 3 weeks, and then it settled into a different shape. Here's where it all landed. It's been almost 11 months. The divorce finalized in October. Rosalind was right about all of it. I got the house in Athmar Park. He signed a quitclaim and I refinanced in my name in November at a rate I hate. The $41,000 of joint savings and the 401k loan were both counted as dissipation, which meant he took the marital debt and I came out on the equity side. His half interest in the Springs townhouse was valued in the settlement, and because he couldn't buy me out of it in cash, it got resolved against his share of everything else. The practical effect is that Anders walked out of an 8-year marriage with a car, his retirement cut roughly in half, and a 50% stake in a townhouse he cannot afford to keep and cannot sell without the other owner's cooperation. And I got Ingrid's ring back. That was a specific line item that Rosalind put in, and Anders fought it, and he lost because it was purchased because it was given to a third party during the marriage, using an asset he'd represented to me as liquidated, and there was a paper trail. The 2019 appraisal, the safe deposit box he opened 4 days after telling me he'd sold it, and his own admission. It came back in a padded envelope from his attorney's office in September. I have not worn it, and I never will. It's in a drawer, and I know exactly how Ingrid would feel about that, and I don't care, Kelsey. I want to be careful here, because a lot of people wanted me to hate her and I couldn't get there. Rosalind's office had to serve her with a subpoena for the property records, which is how she found out I existed. She called me 11 days later, in April, and we talked for 2 hours and 9 minutes. She was 31. She'd been engaged for 2 years and 3 months to a man she believed was amicably divorced. She'd met his mother. She'd asked, more than once, why they couldn't set a date, and he'd told her his divorce had made him gun-shy about paperwork, and she said the thing that made me put my head down on the table. She said, he was home Thursday through Sunday every week. I thought that was so much time for a man with a job like his. He was with her Monday through Wednesday, with me Thursday through Sunday. He'd split a week in half like a duty roster. She'd wondered about Whitney's wedding, actually. She'd asked why they were going to the wedding of a college friend she'd never met, and he'd said the friend was really more his friend than his ex-wife's. And she said Whitney was a little cold with her that night, and she'd assumed it was wedding stress. Kelsey sold the townhouse this summer. Or she's trying to. It's complicated because of the 50% thing, and I don't know how it'll end. We text sometimes, not friends. You can't be friends with the only other person who was in the room, but something. She sent me a photo in June of a plant she'd killed, with the caption, I feel like this is a metaphor, but I'm too tired to do it. Anders lives in an apartment in Aurora now. He lost the job in May, which had nothing to do with me. The company found out he'd been running personal errands on company time in the Springs for years, and the phone line reimbursement he'd been collecting for 4 years for a phone that never made a work call was, from their side, expense fraud. $905 a year for 4 years. They terminated him for cause in May, and he is now, according to a mutual friend, driving for a delivery service. He texted me on my birthday in July. It said, I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know I know what I did. I didn't answer. I'm sitting with that. Whitney and Perry are still married. Half our college group has stopped talking to her, which I did not orchestrate and which I have decided not to feel bad about. Marguerite the photographer refunded Whitney her album fee unprompted, which she absolutely did not have to do and which I think about with enormous affection, and me. I'm okay. Actually okay, not the kind you say at parent conferences. I painted the kitchen a color he'd have hated. I have a dog now, a shepherd mix named Bartok, who is afraid of the vacuum. I went back to playing in a community orchestra in September for the first time since 2016, second stand of the seconds, and I cried in the parking lot after the first rehearsal for reasons I don't fully understand. There's one thing I kept. I printed frame 847, the first one, the coat one, the wide shot of the cocktail hour where you can barely see them, and it's in a folder in my file cabinet with the divorce decree, not because I want to look at him. Because I want to remember that I saw it. 1,100 photographs, and I was not looking for anything, and I was tired, and it was almost 10 at night, and I still saw a coat folded over a stranger's arm and knew. I've spent 8 years being told I overthink things. I don't. I hear what's actually there. So here's what I want to ask. Because my sister and I have argued about this for 6 months, and she still thinks I was cruel. Was I wrong to email the wedding photographer for the seating chart? Knowing it might cost her a client relationship, and knowing what it would do to a marriage that had nothing to do with mine. And the one I actually can't settle. My best friend of 19 years found out in July and sat on it for 6 months so her wedding wouldn't be ruined. Is she genuinely any better than the man who lied to me for 2 years?